so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your super busy schedule to be here.
Well, today's really not that busy. I took the day off just for you. No, not really. I took the day off so I can go and shoot some guns and some personal time. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Good for you. I also took the day off for some personal time. So I did not get to go out and shoot guns though. So how was that today?
It was great. I actually signed up for my first competition.
I saw that.
So I'm excited, a little nervous. I've been
Right.
shooting for a long time, but never in competitions. So
That's
wish me
pretty,
luck.
yeah, that's pretty exciting. So I will be cheering you on
Thanks.
from afar. So I would like for you to share with the viewers and listeners who maybe aren't familiar with you a little bit about your background.
Sure, I've got this down to 45 seconds, I think.
Nice.
So in the 1990s, I was an enlisted artilleryman in the U.S. Army. When I got out, I went to college, got a bachelor's in law enforcement. At the same time, I joined the Guard, did time with a human intelligence unit, commissioned as an infantry officer. But instead of going back active duty, I went into the U.S. Border Patrol, did that for a while, did various assignments there. Then I went on to become what formerly was called the U.S. Customs agent. U.S. Customs Service as a special agent. Eventually, that becomes Homeland Security investigations, working narco trafficking down in San Diego area. In 2005, I was recalled, did a tour in Iraq, and when I returned, I got a job working for the Department of Defense as a civilian U.S. Army CID agent working at Gitmo stuff. And then after that, what did I do? Went to work for another DoD agency. Then I went back, worked for ICE, this time in a removal area. Ran a fugitive operations team for Delaware. Went on to work at ICE headquarters. Went on to work with the White House Security Council. Then what else did I do? And then I did a bunch of other stuff. I got a bunch of education, got two kids, wrote a couple books, and I have an awesome podcast, everybody out there, called The Protectors. And it's not awesome because of me, it's awesome because these guests I have are just amazing.
I think it's probably also awesome because of you, because, if it weren't for you, you wouldn't be getting all these awesome guests. So,
I wouldn't
I
say
I
that.
didn't time that to see if it was 45 seconds, but
I think it was a
that was
little
pretty
over.
solid. It was good though. I think that was good because long list there that you had to run through. So, that was really impressive. I know that what we focus on here on Strong Enough is a lot about relationships and wellness.
Hmm.
And there are a couple things today that I'm really excited to talk to you about as it relates to those things. So, the first off, I know, as you mentioned, you are a veteran. Thank you so much for your service. I know that you also do a lot of advocacy now for veterans. And I want you to tell me a little bit about that, what that means to you, why it's important to you, and what you do.
Now, my biggest goal is to, I have a particular set of skills. And for me, my skill is hiring and the federal hiring process. So that's one of the areas I focus with veterans. I've been volunteering for about 4 or 5, maybe even 6 years now with an organization called Hire Heroes USA, where I give resume advice, I give seminars, and everything really to help people get into the federal government. I also started doing volunteer work with America Corporate Partners, doing the same type of thing. But that one actually helped some veterans into the podcast space, which was kind of neat. So you could volunteer with any set of skills that you have to help veterans out. I volunteered with an organization called Veterati. I'm trying to think, Student Veterans of America. When I was getting my doctorate, I actually stood up a Student Veterans of America chapter, SVA. And then what else? A bunch of stuff with the veterans. I also try to raise as much awareness as I can about burn pits and toxic exposure.
Mhm.
Just because where I was stationed in Balad, Iraq, we were just inundated with toxins and everything, particulate matters in the air. So that's one of the real big things I'm trying to raise awareness of, and that's one thing about having a platform like a podcast is you can talk and raise awareness.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your podcast, The Protectors, and I know that you like to shine a light on military law enforcement, kind of all the people protecting and the people that support them. So, why is that so important to you?
You know, there are so many people out there doing things that aren't in the limelight. There's not everybody has is in front of a mic, not everybody's in front of a camera. And you don't know really is what is going on in their lives, what makes them special. And the podcast is really geared around that. It's those that run towards the danger. You see the videos every time there's a shooting, every time there's a fire, every time there's anything going on where danger is involved. There's a certain select few people, men and women, and any other gender or anything else you want to say, running towards that danger. So yeah, that's my goal. And I always say, and those that support them, because now Protector is gone beyond just those in uniform and those that swore an oath. Now, a protector could be a family, it could be a person, someone who's going to run towards a danger to protect others. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone that gets paid to do it, someone that volunteers for it, or someone signed up to do it. There are protectors among us everywhere.
So, I know that you do this podcast and it's really important to you shining that light on law enforcement and military. How has that been recently with the state of our country and law enforcement and kind of how things have been a little difficult, contentious lately? Have you experienced any backlash from doing this podcast and shining a light on law enforcement?
I haven't personally until I put up a picture of my daughter, and I put a smiley face over her face. And the first time someone actually commented said raising a future white supremacist. I was like, "Huh." So there is a lot of hate out there for me in the protectors community, but typically, if I see that, I block them right away. I don't post a lot of really controversial stuff on my platforms. I may think it, may talk about some topics that are really sensitive with friends and family and everything like that, and not being like a racist or anything like that, but just talking about, hey, you know what? They're really bashing the police. They're really doing this. They're really doing that. I don't agree with it. I tend to keep my personal life off the internet. And a lot of hate I do get is really just, spam hate or just idiots.
Yes, and I noticed your hat today and the flags behind you. You do have a thin blue line going on. I also sport a lot of things with the thin blue line, which has also become a controversial subject in itself. How do you feel about that?
I think that's a great topic to bring up. I tend to tell people out there, unless you get outside of your bubble and unless you see that there is true evil out there, you don't understand what that thin blue line is. It's not a line of secrecy because you and I both know that people like us will speak up. Absolutely. When we see something that's wrong or someone's doing something wrong, we'll speak up. And 99.9% of those who wear the badge and wear the blue will do that same thing. That thin blue line is just a thin line between that evil and the good. It has nothing to do with like an air of secrecy or anything else like that, but it's truly to tell you, like, look, there's only a few people between you and someone truly evil that could take everything away from you.
I completely agree. And you brought up something that I actually do want to dig a little deeper on. You said you and I are the kind of people that would speak up when we see something wrong. And we talked about that a little before we started recording. And I wanted to talk a little bit about you as a whistleblower. I know, I believe it was in 2015, you had the opportunity to speak out when you felt like something was wrong within the government. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. One thing about whistleblowers is I've heard every word you can imagine describing them: snitch, scumbag, a hole, every other word you can imagine, describing people like me. And I always tell people, I'm like, I legally blew the whistle, meaning I went through the proper procedures. I didn't leak things at a press. I didn't go and all of a sudden one day I'm on Fox News or something else saying, this happened. No, what I did was I worked for the White House Security Council and I was part of DHS at the time, part of the smuggling cell, human smuggling cell. And our charter was to, and I wrote the charter too. A lot of people don't realize that our charter was to stop the smuggling of unaccompanied alien children, little kids, into the
Mm.
US. And our goal was to stop these organizations that were doing it. So a lot of people don't realize when those little kids come up to the southwest border, a lot of them are very young, tender aged, and they come into the custody of the US government, either the Border Patrol or Customs and Border Protection Officer. They're given over to ICE. ICE gives them over to Health and Human Services, who gives them over to a sponsor facility, who gives them to a sponsor. And if it turns out that a lot of these people coming in to sponsor the children, And at the time, there was probably about 60 to 80,000 a year sponsors. A lot of them turned out to be criminals, and we weren't vetting the sponsors, i.e., we and the government weren't vetting the sponsors. And when we did run their criminal histories check and found out that they were criminals, up into including sex offenders, I said, "Hey, you know what? We're the human smuggling cell. Why aren't we getting these kids remanded back into our custody?" And it fell on deaf ears. Um, and it fell on deaf ears. And I went home and I said, "You know what? At the time, my kids were 6 and 8, and I said, what if this was my 6 or 8 year old, and they were in the hands of someone who was a sex offender, a sex trafficker? Who knows what's happening to these children?" And I said, "You know what? I got to do something." So I blew the whistle. My career was essentially over after they found out who I was, and that's a story upon itself. But yeah, there are a lot of people out there who will stand up and absolutely blow the whistle. Do I think I'm a hero for doing it? Absolutely not. Would I do it again? Absolutely. No problem at all. I would absolutely do it again. And that is one of the reasons I'll never get promoted in the government, and I'll never do anything else like that. But that's no problem because I could live with myself at night.
Well, that's what I wanted to dig into a little bit was the process that you went through because I shared with you earlier that, I had to go through a similar whistleblowing process of my own, and it was really tough. And I equate things like that and things what you did, minus the trauma beforehand, but of somebody reporting domestic violence, reporting a sex assault, reporting sexual harassment, anything like that. And sometimes I feel like the actual reporting process is worse and more traumatic than whatever you went through. How do you feel about that?
Oh, it is absolutely. When I reported the information, the Office of Special Counsel was arguing back and forth with Health and Human Services about the data I provided. And this is without them knowing who I was at the time. Over and over and over again, arguing about this data. And I'm like, this data came right from them. This is their data. And it was so frustrating. It was absolutely frustrating. And this went on for months. And these kids are still out there. So it was very frustrating, and that's the hardest part about the process is you think there's going to be immediate results. You think those who are doing the wrongdoing are going to be held accountable. At the end of the day, nobody was held accountable, and you have to understand that when you go into it. You can still do the right thing, but you have to understand that it's not going to essentially be the outcome you wanted. I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, the wrong or the bad person doing a bad thing is not going to get fired. They're not going to get reprimanded, and nothing bad will come upon them. But me, if you don't remain anonymous and they find out who you are, there will be repercussions because this isn't a pretty world. It's not a fair world. But that's why I say document, document, document every step you take. You send an email, you print a copy of the email out. You get a little notebook, you time, date, stamp everything. A lot of times, if I didn't have a notebook available, I start emailing myself so I could time, date, stamp with the email. And it sucks that you have to cover your own ass more than when you're trying to do the right
Mhm.
thing. So there's a lot that goes beyond just saying, "Hey, you know what? I want to do the right thing." There are going to be repercussions, but like I said, at the end of the night, I'll sleep. All these people, all this power, um, what do they say that power corrupts? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, or something like that. I
Mhm.
think that's the saying. Is that if there's corrupt people in any organization, they're eventually going to leave that organization, and they're the ones that are going to be looking in the mirror when they're 50, 60 years old, 70 or whatever, and nobody's going to, for one, nobody's going to remember their name, and all that power they went to grasp doesn't mean a damn thing. I'll gladly blow the whistle on anything that I think is, and I'm not trying to say that, hey, you know what, I'm out there looking for corruption, but I'm saying, look, don't do it.
I w It sounds like we read the same manual on what to do when you blow the whistle because I was also documenting and emailing. I have a still years later a file of everything that I printed and a Google Drive full of stuff. And I also agree with what you said as far as really being comfortable with knowing that what you want to happen or what you consider justice may not happen. And I think that's true with a lot of different
Mhm.
things, whether it's whistleblowing or reporting a crime or calling out domestic violence, anything like that. So you said, you know what, I did it because I'm able to sleep at night. What would you tell somebody in a situation where they have something to report, but they don't know what to do? They're not ready. What would your advice be to them?
Write it down. First off, write down everything. Do a timeline. If you're going to report a wrongdoing, whoever takes that report is going to know what exactly they're looking at. I know when I first did the whistleblowing, I went home and I got on Google. I did everything. I was researching how to legally do it, see if I was a protected class, see if I would what I could do, what kind of remedies there would be if there was whistleblower retaliation. But the other thing too is really write a timeline. Timelines are critical because whoever's looking at this information is going to say, okay, August 1st, 2000, whatever, this happened. August 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and do a chronological timeline. That's what I mean. Like write it down chronologically. And then exactly what happened and exactly the names and parties and everything. And if you have emails when you're writing that chronology, you could put exhibits, you could do everything. It's really like a case. You are
Mhm.
now your own lawyer. And that's the other thing. Do not rely on lawyers. Lawyers are expensive and lawyers sometimes don't have your best interest more than their pocketbook in their mind.
I agree with that for sure, and I think it's always great to be prepared. So, when you did this, what repercussions did you experience, if any, with your work relationships?
The people I work with are great. Leadership hated me, obviously. I mean, um, and I'll tell you kind of like the quick story about how they found out who I was. So I talked about this data. I had a spreadsheet, and on that spreadsheet was 29,000 names. And of those, they were names of sponsors. ICE uh, took that names and ran them through databases and determined that out of that, I think 3,400 were criminals, came back with criminal histories. And that's where I said, including sex offenders. This data was going back and forth between HHS and me. HHN, well, through my OSC, Office of Special Counsel lawyer,
Mhm,
who's a government lawyer who does these cases. And they kept saying this data is corrupt. We don't know where it came from, even though it's from them. And okay, then they said, hey, you know what? We're gonna do a sampling to find out. So they took a sample of 25 names out of 29,000 and determined that only one of those 25 came back with any with criminal history. So I was like, look, um, I can't deal with these people anymore. I'm like, set up a confidential phone call with them, and I want to explain to them this data and the spreadsheet. And I knew what they were doing. They were trying to narrow down who I was. So when I talked to them, I first thing I said was, I want a list of everybody's who's on this phone call, and I want a record of what we talk about. And they're like, okay. In there, I said that I know how to analyze data and who I was and how I was related to this security council or the cell. And the thing with the cell, there's only 13 of us.
mhm,
I mentioned in there somewhere in the conversation that I was a certified fraud examiner. I'm the only certified fraud examiner I know of. So it was quite
mm,
simply this interview was on Thursday night. When I went back after a 3-day weekend, my supervisor called me up and says your detail is terminated. So they terminated me from the cell and moved me back to headquarters. When I went back to ICE headquarters, they put me in a cubicle right in the middle of everybody, so everybody could see me and see what I'm doing all day long. Gone were the time, where I could have like a cubicle anywhere else. So
mhm,
I'm right here, right in the middle. All management could look at me. I started noticing my emails were getting corrupted. Uh, my cubicle was getting things were shifted around at night because I would put like little things up so I know if someone was going in
mhm,
there and doing things. Um, the big thing was the email. The email, I started losing emails. Things were open when they weren't supposed to be open. They were trying to do everything they can to find something on me
mhm.
to get rid of me. I guarantee it. Fortunately, I was able to find a job and get out of there as soon as I could. And even then, that took a few months. But yeah, they'll do everything they can, and they'll essentially When I fought back for whistleblower retaliation later on,
Mhm.
they put the ICE deputy chief counsel's legal team on me. So it wasn't like, you know, they'll take all available resources to cover their ass. I mean, you know,
Did all that make you feel paranoid? You know, when you're coming in and your stuff's moved around or your emails are read, how did
yeah,
that make you
absolutely.
feel?
And the other thing too is I could swear I was spotting government vehicles on my street. And I've done surveillance throughout the years, and you know, I know exactly what they're doing.
Mm,
I don't know how far they went or what they did to try to root me out, and whether that still follows me to this day. I don't know. I mean, that's one of the reasons I like you and I were joking about it. I'm like, I have 19 months till I can retire, and I would never say that would want to give up serving the
mhm,
country because that's essentially what I've been doing since 1993. Whether it's active duty reserves and then on to federal government. And now I'm looking at, 21 and a half years as a Fed. And it's like, wow. Um, but I tell you what, 19 months comes, I'll be able to look myself in the mirror and be like, hey, you know what? I never went out as a senior level
mhm.
person like all these other people did. I went out as what I'm supposed to be.
How did that make you feel? You know, you changed agencies, but you're still serving more or less the same mission, the same government. Do you have any ill will or bad feelings towards all of that based on everything that's happened?
No, because the thing is, the people on the ground, the agents on the ground, the people working the ground level stuff are still good. They're still doing their thing. You still have managers out there doing the good thing, doing the good fight. The really bad people are still going to jail. Um, it's just like in any police department or any corporate gig or anything. Sometimes there's not the best. What rises to the top? You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Not always
mhm.
the best rise to the top, but in between there, you'll find a lot of good people. I'm not going to let it make me disgruntled. I'm not going to let it turn me into someone who's just sitting at home and typing Twitter rants and raves. I'm just going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to take what I learned and I'm going to try to make other people's lives better. Because why not?
How are you able to separate that for somebody who is in a difficult job and whether it's something, really significant like what you experienced and went through, or just somebody who works with some shitty people and has trouble going to work every day, how do you separate that and be able to say like it's okay, like there's good people here, I'm still making a difference. How do you do
You know
that?
what? Find a mission outside of that. That's why I have a podcast. That's why I write books. That's why I do a lot of other things other than a job. The job's not worth it anymore. Unfortunately, I love investigating people. I love investigating bad people, evil people, I like to say. I liked having a badge and gun. Will I miss it when I turn it in? Yeah, I probably will. I'll miss doing the job. But you know what? There's other opportunities out there. One of my friends just retired from the FBI a few years ago, and he sent me some pictures. And he's like, he just became a sheriff's deputy at 56 years old. And I'm like, huh? Maybe someday you'll see Deputy Piccolo, or maybe someday it'll be Sheriff Piccolo. Maybe I'll run for sheriff.
There
But
you
there's always
go.
other opportunities. I always consider when I retire, I'm going on to my next career, my next phase. And for people who are out there having the problems, having out, whether it's you come home and you do something else, whether that's find it's not a hobby, like the podcast and stuff. It was a hobby at first, and now it's like it's my outlet.
Mhm.
The worst thing to do is booze. I was up to last August, I was up to 1.75 liters a week of crack and rum. And I was like, damn, this dude's drinking a lot, gaining a lot of weight. And I just stopped. I was like, I've drank, I think, 4 times since then. And every time I drank since then, it's just been it's not a good thing. It's not a good outlet. And after a while, you'll lose the taste of it. You'll lose the
Mhm.
want of it. I mean, I still want to drink here and there, but it's not a good outlet. So when you're trying to get rid of some of those bad days and some of those bad feelings, booze really doesn't help. A glass of wine here or there, yeah. But when you're coming home, when you're hammering it,
Mhm.
thinking that that's going to be your creative outlet and your outlet out of it, it doesn't really help that good.
That does seem to be an outlet for a lot of people around, particularly law enforcement, military, active service veterans. So, what did you replace that with other than the podcast?
Well, at first it was a lot of sweets, which is not good because, man, I started, woo. Um, I ruck a lot now. I try to walk,
Mhm.
and walking helps. I mean, especially when you're a big person. I don't like running. I'll do it if I have to, but walking really helps. Podcasting, like you said, that's kind of over there. I teach a lot of college now too. I'm trying to build my. I always tell people like up until like my early 40s, everything was a professional resume. So always trying to build my
Mm.
resume, and that's why I have this ton of education. Is I'm always trying to do stuff to keep my mind busy. But now I'm working on my personal resume, and my personal resume is things that I enjoy: biking, walking. I love photography type stuff. I love creating stuff. I love writing. Just find a good outlet that you enjoy. You only get one of these lives. And if you're going to be in a job, you need to pay bills, and not all the times those jobs are great. Um, but hey, they pay the bills. But on the outside of the 8 or 10 hours you're working a day, do something else. And build something else. Build something that's gonna like, you know what, it feels like it's yours. And a lot of times, build a legacy. You know, nobody's gonna remember the guy who worked 60, 80 hours a week and was miserable and disgruntled. And if they do remember him, they're gonna be like, oh God, that guy was an asshole.
He was
So
miserable
yeah.
and disgruntled.
Yeah, exactly. I gotta tell you my other philosophy when I was actually going to work with people is one of the partners, one of the people at work, very disgruntled, very bitter. And I said to them, I'm like, look, here's a deal. I don't, that stuff spreads. One person that's disgruntled is spread. I'm like, here's the deal. And I said it nice. I'm like, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do 90-10. 90% of our day has to be positive. 10% can be as negative as you want to be. But you only have 10%. So you have to save that 10% for when you really want to be negative. I wasn't trying to be all like introspective or anything. I was like, this sounds pretty cool. So then after a while, you start forgetting about that 10% and you start being positive. You can't change these people who are going to be uh, idiots and bad managers. I'm trying not to be my infantry swearing self,
You can be
but
yourself, it's
oh, okay.
okay.
Well, those people who are
Yes.
going to be assholes are going to be assholes, regardless of whatever. They're always going to be an asshole to you. You
Mhm.
could sit down with them, you could tell people about them, you could do whatever, but they're always going to be assholes. Don't let them take that 10% and make that into 100%, because that is going to make you bitter and that is going to sour the relationships around you. So 90-10, that's where it's at.
I love that. I'm gonna have to start doing that at work because we have some sourpusses there every now and then
hmm
as well.
90, just
So
tell them 90-10. You got 10%. When you going to use it?
I like that. But we have people in my office who are gonna actually do the math and figure out exactly to the minute how long is that 10% and what they get from that. How important would you say is self-care?
Absolutely important. Like I was talking about before with the booze. Man, booze sucks. Because I am riddled here and there with anxiety, and a lot of us get that anxiety. But if you don't have that outlet and you're not burning it out off, that's where I come in with the walks. Walking, um, eat something good, put some good fuel in your body. I'm drinking water all day long. You'd be surprised how much hydration helps. But self care is absolutely, it's paramount. You have to. Um, Sleep. Good luck with that. I mean, I
Right.
who sleeps are good,
I
but do what you
try.
can. Do what you can. That's the thing. Do what you can. If it's a 10-minute walk, a 5-minute walk, if it's a ruck, if something, do something you can enjoy. I put some AirPods in, throw an Audible book in or a podcast, and I walk. I love it.
I love that. You mentioned anxiety in your life. How long have you dealt with that?
Phew, I don't know, probably my whole life. In one way or the other, I just didn't recognize it before.
Mhm.
I think it has something to do with my family as well, not just, anything I've interacted with over the past 20 years in war and law enforcement because I had an older brother who was riddled with yeah, I used to think he was bipolar, but I think a lot of it was anxiety.
Mhm.
And he would smoke a lot of weed and then he started doing cocaine and eventually he passed of that. But I think that's a lot of where that comes from. A lot of it is you're looking for an outlet and you do destructive things. But there are ways to manage it.
What do you feel like has been the most successful way that you have managed that anxiety in your life?
Have an outlet. Right. Writing is so therapeutic, even if you don't publish it.
Mhm. Yeah, I love to write, and I know so a lot of people do talk about the therapeutic benefits of writing. I've talked to a few people that it was a little bit more traumatic initially to do that writing, but as they went through it, it got a little bit easier and a little more therapeutic per se. I know you have done a lot of writing that you have actually published. Tell me, what was your favorite thing to write so far?
Probably, books are okay. My books are crap. I love them. You know, they're really, but a lot of it's technical, and I didn't really get into my emotions, how I went through a lot of the stuff that I did. Because I wanted people to know the facts. I wanted them to know what the Southwest border was like. I wanted them to know what the kids are like. I wanted them to know what trafficking is like and everything else like that. But I really like writing op eds.
Mhm,
And I wrote a series about trafficking, human trafficking,
mhm.
domestic trafficking and I really enjoy writing about that because it's about 800 to 1,200 words. I can get out the premise, I can get out the facts, and I can make it so people actually want to read it. So yeah, I love that, and I'm working on the next book now, which is going to be on domestic trafficking.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think a lot of people think of trafficking and they think it's people in another country chained in a basement, being beat every day, and it's so much more than that. So I would love for you to tell people what trafficking really is and how much we experience it here in our country.
It's everywhere. It's in every town, and I didn't know that until I started really getting into the domestic issue. Most of my career has been with the border, whether that's any of our border nexus, anything nexus to the border. But there is trafficking happening in every town, and there's what really surprised me about it is the recruitment methods, the indoctrination, I should say, is how these traffickers aren't what you think. They're not gonna they do drive around in vans here and there and grab kids, but the reality is a lot of them are pimps. They're gonna almost like recruiting,
Mhm,
indoctrinating by using social media. They get a latch into a young child, a teen, and they start building a relationship with them. And they're building these relationships with five, six, seven girls or little boys at a time through social media, and they're drawing them into their world until eventually they meet in person, and then it's one thing or the other, and they're brought into this world of the sex trade, where they're being essentially raped daily, um, for the trafficker to get money. I mean, it's not complex as people think, and it's not a
mhm.
lot of it. Not all of it has to do with organized crime. A lot of it can be a pimp, a trafficker, running three or four girls or boys. Primarily, it's girls,
Mhm.
over and over again. So I mean, it's happening everywhere.
I have had the opportunity to deal with that as well in my profession. And so, even here in beautiful Summit County, Colorado, which is a resort destination, we have had people that have been trafficked through here. I feel like a lot of similar methods are used when you have someone who is a domestic abuser in a domestic violence relationship and a trafficker. They use kind of the same grooming,
Hmm.
coercion type methods to get their hooks in. What would you say are things that people can look for to identify a trafficking victim?
The thing with the victim too is look for if they have multiple phones on them, or if someone's holding their phone for them. That's the other thing. A lot of times they'll have a phone for the Johns and everything. I'll be calling and texting them, and then the traffickers will hold their phones, hold their belongings. They can't do a lot on their own. Not all of them are dressed like you would think a prostitute is dressed up. They could be dressed in anything, jeans, t-shirts, or anything. The other thing is a lot of them aren't going to look at like typical. They're not going to be like, hey, you know what? Look over here. I'm a trafficking victim.
Mhm.
A lot of times they don't think there's any way out, and they're just into this life of servitude. So there aren't really any specific means to say, okay, that person's a victim over there. You really need to kind of look at the whole situation. And I always tell people like, don't vigilantism doesn't work,
Mhm.
but be the best witness that you can. You know, if you have the opportunity, you tell them, hey, look, take pictures, take notes, take whatever, and then report that to the authorities.
I think that is fantastic advice because we do have a lot of people running around that want to save the day and just jump right in there and do something. And the thing with that also, it's not safe, but then victims, like you said, they're not always ready to admit what's going on. They're not ready to be saved per
No,
se.
they're not.
Ha- have you dealt with that a lot? And what would you say to that? What's your experience been with that?
I haven't, but in my research, I found out that a lot of these so quote unquote vigilantes that go out there and grab these kids, they're not there's got to be aftercare. There's got to be a lot that goes on beyond taking someone from someone else. And now what's going to happen to the victim?
Mhm.
The main goal is to make that victim a survivor. And that has a lot to do with aftercare. I do have a whole series if anybody wants to know more about it on my YouTube channel, where I interview people from nonprofits, and I also put up a couple videos of myself on there.
Nice, and we'll definitely make sure that we get all of that information out to everybody before I let you go today, for sure. I've experienced the same thing though. People can't be saved until they're ready to be saved. And I love that you mentioned that transition from victim to survivor. What does that mean to you? What is that turning point in taking somebody from being a victim and turning them into or having them turn themselves into a survivor?
Recognizing that they're a victim. I think that's the big thing. Recognizing that they're a victim, but they're not just a victim anymore. Now they're going to take the next step and pull themselves out of it. Either they could do that by themselves or with the help of others.
I think that's amazing advice. Yes, that's um it seems to be difficult for a lot of people to realize that and to understand that people can't be helped until they're ready and they're ready to take those next steps. So, tell me what is next for you?
Write some books, retire in 19 months, have you on my show, talk a bunch of shit with a lot of other people, and just keep talking.
Yeah. I love all those things. That sounds great. Um, if you were going to give somebody a piece of advice when it comes to relationships in general, what would that piece of advice be?
Um, one thing is a lot of people focus on the other person, but sometimes you got to focus on yourself and find out what's right for you. It's not always about it's not being selfish, but always focusing on others sometimes isn't the best thing for you.
I love that. That has been a really common theme with a lot of people here, is really talking about that inward focus and making sure that you're taking care of yourself. Well, I know that you know me a little bit, so you know I collect tattoos. I know you also collect tattoos.
I do.
So we've talked about some really heavy stuff. So I want to kind of turn it a little bit, talk about something a little lighter. Tell me about your favorite tattoo that you have.
It's a skull and crossbones, and that is memento mori. Remember, you will die. And it's not a morbid thing. It's just saying, hey, you know what? You're going to die one day. So live the life that you have now.
You also have a Star Wars tattoo, am I
I have
correct?
tons of Star Wars tattoos.
I think we have a lot of Star Wars fans out there. Tell me a little bit about what got you in what made it so amazing that you had to get it tattooed on you?
Well, when I was a kid, I didn't have the best childhood. So I used to always escape into fantasy, whether that's comic books and a lot of movies. I'm like an IMDb database. And one thing is always, I love Star Wars. I love think of another universe out there that's outside of our world. I love that there's good and bad, and I just love it. So one of my other favorite tattoos is I have a samurai Darth Vader, and then I got the Death Star has all my families on it. I got Tie, not Tie fighters, an X-wing, Boba Fett. I have my own design
Nice.
of the Jedi thing, and I have a Millennium Falcons on my.
Right
I got all
on.
sorts of stuff.
So I just had a conversation recently with Marcus Torgerson,
Yeah,
and
Marcus is awesome.
he's really nervous about this area. He
Let
said
me
he
show you
can't go to
something.
jail because he can't
Yeah,
do that.
let me. So I have a compass on my one elbow, and I have the 13 stars that go around my other elbow. And the reason that is because the elbow is the absolute worst place I've gotten a tattoo. I hate it. Between that and my wrist, I hate it.
Yeah, the wrist, I mean, I don't even have anything like big on my wrist, but it wasn't very pleasant. What is your next tattoo going to be?
I don't know. My arms are all done. I might do my back next, and I kind
Okay,
of want to do it. Probably a big cross or something.
nice. Is
You
your
know.
back a clean canvas right
No,
now?
like I got some tattoos from when I was a kid on my back. I have to cover them up. No, there's really not a lot of clean slate. I'm not gonna get any leg tattoos. That's
Nothing?
about it. I have a scorpion there, but that's about it.
Okay, okay. Well, Marcus will be happy to hear that because I think I turned him off of the outer thigh tattoo
Oh
after
no, no, no.
talking to him about that. That was very painful as well.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Well, Jason, where can people find you if they don't already follow you, which of course they do, but for the 3 people out there that don't, where can they find you on all the
Really?
socials?
Just at Dr. Jason Piccolo. My website is jasonpiccolo.us, and I'll have all my links on there. Podcast, The Protectors with Jason Piccolo. YouTube's The Protector Show. So I'll have almost all my content on there, and just pretty much anywhere. Instagram at Dr. Jason Piccolo. So yeah.
And Twitter, you're on there as well.
Oh yeah, I really don't do much on there. At Dr. Jason Piccolo on there.
I'm working on it. It's
I can't
so
deal with it.
hard. I go on there to look at other people, but I don't know. I have one, I just don't really use it. So, well, I appreciate your time today. You have been amazing, and I really appreciate your opening up and sharing some relationship advice, some work relationship advice, and talking a little tattoos with me. So, thank you so much.
Well, I really appreciate having me on. I'm actually losing my voice, so yeah, woo, first time for me.
All right. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're available on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.